From Stranraer to Inverness, from Hawick to Aviemore. For the past 4 years, Debate Night has been travelling Scotland, tackling the big issues of the day. Tonight, for our 100th show, we are in Aberdeen. Welcome to Debate Night. Scotland has a new First Minister, so what will that mean for our audience here tonight and for you at home? On our panel with their views this evening, award-winning writer and broadcaster Lesley Riddoch, columnist for The Herald and The National. Lesley also produces a weekly podcast. In addition, she's co-founder and director of Nordic Horizons, a policy group that brings Nordic experts to the Scottish Parliament. From the SNP, Karen Adam is the MSP for Banshire and Buchan Coast. Karen was the first woman elected as an MSP for that constituency when she entered Parliament in 2021. Prior to politics, she volunteered in her community as a compassionate service leader and a young women's advocate. Michael Mara is the Scottish Labour MSP for North East Scotland and the party's spokesperson for education and skills. Also elected to Parliament 2 years ago, he has been a Labour member since he was a teenager. Away from politics, Michael is currently in training for his first London Marathon, or Mara-a-thon, next month. Come on, 100 shows. Douglas Lumsden is the Scottish Conservative MSP for North East Scotland and the party's spokesperson for public finance, planning and community wealth. Former co-leader of Aberdeen City Council, Douglas studied at Robert Gordon University and spent over 20 years working in IT. And finally, James Bream. James is a business leader, economist and CEO of Catoni Engineering. He was also previously a director at Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce for 5 years. Away from business, James is also a columnist with the Press and Journal and has acted as a media commentator on the energy sector. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And of course, welcome to our audience here in Aberdeen. It's great to have you with us. And you at home can join in the discussion. It's at BBC Debate Night to give us a follow on social media. The hashtag is BBCDN to be part of the conversation on social media. And the programme's also available as a Debate Night podcast shortly after this broadcast. So let's get started. Our first question of the night comes from Craig Donaldson. Craig.
Good evening, panel. With the narrow margin of victory by Humza Yousaf over Kate Forbes and his subsequent offer of a role as Rural Affairs Minister rejected, does this reinforce the divisions that have appeared within the SNP during the leadership campaign?
Thank you, Craig. Leadership race ended on Monday. On the BBC Results programme, Lesley, you said that he had reached across the divide in the party in his speech. How did that work out in terms of the cabinet, though?
Well, just on the specific question that Craig's asked, I actually think no. I have never seen a more relieved-looking woman in my life than Kate Forbes when she didn't win. And I could be misinterpreting that completely, but she looks like someone who was offered a decent portfolio. I don't know if Aberdeen feels so urban that it has got no sort of fellow thinking for the vast bulk of Scotland that is actually rural. It's not a nothing portfolio. It's not being sent to Siberia, as some people seem to have suggested on social media. And she spent a full day considering it. If that was a rubbish offer, she would have rejected it right there on the spot. So it was a possible goer. She's had all sorts of things on her mind. I mean, I have no idea how you managed to have a new bairn and 3 children to look after and live in Dingwall and get to Edinburgh. So I don't know whether she's decided she's got a different possibility. She's a young woman. She could just actually do something else than be in a cabinet where she would actually be grinding against the prevailing thrust, which is now going to be a redistributive, social democratic kind of thrust if Humza Yousaf does anything like what he promised. So actually, yes, of course there are divisions within the SNP. It's a massive blinking party. There's a point where it was the 3rd largest party in Britain, never mind Scotland. It always had divisions. They were just covered up during the time that Nicola Sturgeon was in charge. So after 16 years, there's been a wee chance for them to surface. I don't know where they'll go now, but I think Kate's made probably a pretty good decision for her.
Michael Mara, was this the result that Scottish Labour wanted to see, continuity in terms of the leadership?
I think for the country, I mean, Kate said, you know, that continuity would be mediocrity, and I think actually what we've seen in the first, 24 hours is more of the same. A real difficulty in joining the party up, and in essence, that's the SNP's concern in terms of their own internal divisions and how they manage that. That's not, for other parties necessarily our concern. My concern is about how divided the country is. in essence, and actually that we need to make sure that we can come together and try and deal with the NHS crisis, the cost of living crisis, which is what people are concerned about. The latest that I'd heard and speculating around that was that Kate Forbes had said that she didn't feel that the Greens' position on the Marine bill and about how that was to be managed around the Highlands, that was going to cause her huge problems in her constituency. So I think that conflict about the tensions within the government between the Greens and the SNP is again coming to the fore. But I do have real worries about the cabinet that's been picked. Frankly, on the performances, the records of the people that are involved in it, and whether they can actually deliver the kind of management of the Scottish public services and our economy that we require.
I want to hear what the audience say. I'll come to you in just a second. But Karen, Adam, the appointments that have been made and the situation with Kate Forbes, does it do anything to heal the divisions within the party that we saw so clearly during the leadership race?
Well, it wasn't divisions, it was differences. And I don't think having differences of opinion, different values means that there are deep divisions of any sort. That's what a campaign is. You're putting forward your vision and you put it out to the people to vote for you and what you believe in. Now, Humza said that he was going to reach across to the other candidates, and he did. As soon as he was elected SNP leader, he went straight and spoke to Kate Forbes, and she was very gracious in that and saying that he did keep to his word. And what he's been saying in front of camera and behind closed doors has been the same, that every effort he is extending to get us all working together for the benefit of the people, for the manifesto commitments that we were elected on, and to continue that 8-year SNP streak of winning elections and delivering for the people, because ultimately it's the people that decide and the people have been voting SNP.
What will Shona Robson bring to the job of Finance Secretary that Kate Forbes didn't or couldn't?
I don't think that you would say that she didn't or couldn't, but I think Shona's going to come into her own. Shona's an extremely capable politician. She's very intelligent. She's smart as a whip. And I think she showed that, particularly during the end of last year with the GRR, how well she can handle difficult situations.
Douglas Lumsden?
No. Shona Robson, she was sacked as Health Secretary, so I don't think she's going to bring much to the Cabinet. But it is, Leslie's right, it's a deeply divided party, what we're seeing just now. And, you know, to say that it's wasn't a demotion for Kate Forbes is completely wrong. It's a complete slap in the face for Kate Forbes. It was a clear demotion from finance, where you're looking after everything, to just one part. Yes, rural is important, but it's not important as the finance. And, you know, what we've seen from the SNP is that most of their members didn't want Humza. You know, I think it was only 31% of the SNP membership actually voted for Humza as their candidate. So, you know, it's there's some real issues within that party now.
All right, let's hear from the audience. Man there. Yeah, on you go.
Some people in the SNP don't really like some other people in the SNP, but then some people in the Tory party don't like some other people in the Tory party, and some people in the Labour Party don't like some other people in the Labour Party. So I don't think this is quite the issue that the media want to make this.
OK. Man on the front row down there, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the divisions within the SNP, they've been there since the independence referendum. And I think they've clearly shown themselves to get worse and worse over time. The recent resignations by your chief executive and indeed by the press officer, they just show that there's no communication between this party, and it seems like it's divided between Westminster and Holyrood. And we can say that about Labour, we can say that about Tory, but you're the government today, so we expect someone a wee bit better, I think, than that from the SNP.
OK, and gentleman in the glasses there. Yes, on you go.
Yeah, surely the people of Scotland deserve the best and most qualified people to govern themselves. And the feeling I get is the SNP are more concerned with their internal politics than putting the first team on the pitch, if you like, to make sure that the people of Scotland get the best team working for them.
Let me go back to Craig, who asked the question. What do you think in answer to your own question?
So I guess I think the divisions are apparent. I accept, you know, and I don't personally obviously know the detail behind the discussions, but you do get a sense that one issue was potentially rural affairs rubbing up against the Greens. I do also accept that the reality is, from looking from the outside, that rural affairs is a demotion, you know, from where she was. You know, and I appreciate you're shaking your head, but I think for the vast majority of the public, that's how it's perceived. I think one of the points that maybe picking up on is this aspect about politicians failing the general public. You know, I do feel that both a local level and a national level, that politicians across the divide, I don't think our system's actually delivering for us, you know. And I think that's maybe something that I'd like to see change in future.
OK, the perception is everything, Karen. And if the perception is that it would have been a demotion, that's the reality for people who are watching.
It's not the reality. It's certainly not a demotion. I sit on the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee, and we have some extremely important legislation coming forward and has came forward. Now, Rural Affairs deals with our food security. How much more important can you get than the food that we eat and the sustenance for our people of Scotland?
Well, the economy pays for everything.
Exactly.
The food that we generate here in Scotland adds to the economy. Our fishing sector, our agricultural sector, our whisky, it all adds to the economy. There is no finances without our agricultural sector.
We've got a businessman here, and an economist and a businessman. James Bream, what do you think about the situation with Kate Forbes and the cabinet that we've seen emerging over the last 24 hours?
So I think, if I'm honest with you, as a business person, you look on it with a bit of dismay, actually. So it's been no better, the SNP leadership process, than the Tory one in Westminster. You have these arguments, and actually what you want...
We haven't crashed the economy,
what you want is really, you know, they're meant to be in one team, OK? So they can think different things, they can be divided, but actually they should be on the same path and the same journey if they're following the same manifesto. And for me, I think it's, you know, it's pretty poor reflection on politics in both areas, actually. You know, you couldn't run a business like it, put it that way. And ultimately, government is there to run the PLC of the UK or Scotland. So I think that there should be a bit of reflection on both sides, actually.
Gentleman in the blue shirt there. Yes.
Yeah, I think we're talking about divisions amongst politicians when we should be concentrating on the divisions in our society, particularly divisions of wealth, where we are a very wealthy country, but there's a lack of investment in the overall services of our people. And we've ended up with the crazy situation now where there's child poverty of significant amounts in this country. And here in Aberdeen, we've ended up now with the crazy situation of closing libraries and closing swimming pools. And we should be investing in services to the people instead of having politicians arguing amongst themselves.
We'll move on to some of that in just a second. But Leslie, just let me ask you, where do we sit now in terms of Scottish independence? We were supposed to have that conference about deciding the way forward for the party. Should that still go ahead now? What should happen now?
I don't know. I mean, you know, that was always an SNP gig. That was going to be held to try to figure out whether a de facto referendum was the next best thing to do with the election, the general election that will come next year. It looks like none of the candidates actually thought that was a good idea. So, in a sense, there's not much point in having that particular conference. But there is going to be a general election. There is still about a half of Scotland that is at least open to the idea of independence. There are, in fact, quite a number of people in your own party, for example, who are pro the idea of having an independence referendum. So it's not gone away. We're not having a childish teenage phase that we're growing out of, and we're all going to say, hey, do you know, we're going back to normal. I appreciate the next election will be different because Labour is in with a shout. And that means that there has to be some good thinking going on with the SNP as to how they regroup. Because the thing that keeps the SNP together is a support for independence. If you take that out of the equation, you're going to have a lot more infighting than there is already. And, I mean, as the gentleman was sort of saying earlier, it does actually matter that a top team is actually thinking very closely the same way about economics, about the best way forward and so on. And it would be difficult to have two people who had characterised themselves as different in the leadership campaign being Finance Minister and First Minister right together with different views. In much the same way as it seems to be difficult to have Jeremy Corbyn in a Labour Party run by Keir Starmer. So it's not like it's a particular thing here. You need a top team that's thinking the same way. And they need to explain what that is. I think the SNP top team at the moment are not explaining their strategy very well at all.
Karen Adam, what happens to independence now? Should that conference be reconvened?
Well, I think that's going to be up to the SNP leader, our new First Minister, Hamza
What's your
Yousaf.
view?
Well, I would love to get together as soon as possible and have this conversation because I think ultimately it comes down to the members of the SNP, our activists and the Yes movement as a whole to get out on the ground, knocking doors, talking to people, and as Hamza says, building that consensus for independence. It's not an abstract idea. And that's what we need to be getting across to people, is what does independence actually truly mean for Scotland? It's not independence for independence sake. It's independence because we want more powers here. We want full devolved powers in our own country so that we can make full decisions for ourselves. And what does that look like? That looks like progress, that looks like equality, it looks like human rights, it looks like building a country on the foundation of human rights and a health and well-being economy, and embracing renewables, rewilding, highly protected marine areas. I know that you touched on that there, but having conversations about these things to see how far we can go in Scotland to protect our country, but also ensure that it's the people that are having a say on it.
Right, well, we're going to give them a say now. On that point of renewables, actually, we'll go on to our second question of the night. Everything you hear here, you can get involved in the discussion from home. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Our second question of the night comes from Michael Sutcliffe. Michael, where are you? Evening.
How should Scotland meet its current and future energy needs, given that the UK spent £117 billion on imported oil and gas in last year?
Thank you. Those figures from the Offshore Energy UK report just out yesterday. First time it's been above 100 billion, I think. James Breen, we're at a bit of a crossroads in terms of where we go with oil and gas and renewables. What's your view of where we head, where we turn?
Yeah, that's a lot of imports. We're going to need oil and gas, as untenable as some people may feel that to be said, for the next 15 or 20 years as part of our balance of energy. Importing oil and gas doesn't really make sense when we can produce it locally. I suppose one of the reasons that I think that is energy security and having a little bit more control over our supply, and I think the last few years have shown that's important. I think one thing not a lot of people think about, though, is importing oil is actually even worse for the environment than using our domestic oil and gas. So I think for that reason, local supply, if we can do it, is really important. And I'm probably going to sound like a broken record here, but I think both our governments are undermining that at the moment. I'd love probably to hear a little bit more about what the future position on exploration is going to be, actually, because I think we can produce more of our own cleaner hydrocarbons with lower emission new basin opportunities potentially, moving out some of the older ones. And I'd also be interested to hear what Douglas feels about how we can evolve the windfall tax. I think a lot of the industry expected it to happen, if I'm quite honest. I think it would be naive to say otherwise, but where does it go? And ultimately, the signal and the way it was implemented, how does that impact future investment? Because, frankly, even some of the green schemes have been impacted by that. So plenty of work to do, actually.
OK, let's unpick a bit of that. Karen Adam, let's start with you. The presumption under Nicola Sturgeon was against further exploration for oil and gas. Where do we go from here?
Well, Hamza has said that he also agrees that we should be winding down on oil and gas, but we can't have a cliff edge. We need to look back. Well, what we need to do is start progressing more towards ensuring that we have more renewable energy. We are in a country that is energy rich and fuel poor. That is an injustice. That is a social injustice. We have the capacity to be the energy capital of the world.
But that's capacity. That doesn't happen overnight, does it? In the meantime, we're paying above £100 billion to import oil and gas.
It does take time to do that, but we also need to ensure that we get people on board with this.
So I was just wondering to answer my point is, what is the point on exploration and what is the view on that? So I think we need to do both. So we need more renewable energy, no doubt about it. But demand isn't going down. So will there be a change in the view on exploration licences, or will it be the status quo? Because I think there are cleaner ways that we can produce our hydrocarbons than we are at the moment if we allow new exploration.
Well, I think you just made a point there saying that demand is still quite high. So we need to look into why the demand is still quite high. Why is it that way? And that needs to wind down. What we have to do is, you know, I was always taught that you always leave things better than what you find them. I don't want to be leaving this planet, leaving it worse for my children and my grandchildren, and looking into their eyes and saying that I didn't do all I could to prevent the disasters that are man-made, that should be solved by man.
Michael
and
Mara?
we can't keep dragging our heels on.
After 16 years, the question is, why is demand still so high? And the government has done next to nothing about reducing demand. Proper insulation schemes across the country, which were rolled out in other parts of Europe when the energy price spiked. Absolutely nothing done here. And also an industrial strategy to deliver actually the kind of renewable jobs that we need. So the SNP promised 120,000 jobs in renewable energy. We've had 20,000 so far, and the date for that passed 3 years ago.
SNP put forward 500 million to a just transition, asked the UK government to match it.
I would say since 2010, we have not had a proper energy policy for the whole of the UK.
Okay, all right.
And we need one.
25,000 jobs at risk here in the North East over the next 10 years. Let me hear from the audience. Man in the white shirt.
Everyone talks about oil and gas as being energy, you know, power and all the rest of it. But there's so many other things come out of oil that you can't just do away with.
Yeah.
You know, so you still got to need oil. Whether every car was running on electric and all the power in the electrical homes was from nuclear energy. It doesn't matter, you're still going to need oil. How are you going to replace it and all the other things?
OK, hang on a second. Man in the black top there, yeah.
I'm sure that, like myself, a lot of people in Aberdeen who do work in oil and gas, who lived through the last downturn that we had 2015, 2016 and lost their jobs, would like an idea of what might be the plan to come up, because as you say, we might only have 15, 20 years left. So many people in Aberdeen especially depend on their livelihood on oil and gas. What's going to happen to them?
So we hear a lot about this phrase just transition, don't we? What does that mean to you?
So I had quite a bad experience with the whole transition that was done from 2015 and the way that the transition training fund that was set up was managed. So I retrained but was told I wasn't eligible for the fund, and I was. And it wasn't until after I'd paid for everything that I found out, because the way it was handled was done really badly, because the people who were in charge of it didn't know what they were doing.
Right, Karen Adam, what does just transition mean for that man? How's it going to happen?
I grew up in Aberdeen City. I do have family and friends who've worked in the oil industry, and this is why it's really important that we don't send everybody off a cliff edge. A just transition is a transition into renewables, but it's also in the further sector in regards to being a net zero country as well. For example, carbon capture, utilisation and storage, St Fergus at Peterhead, the Acorn project, that is moving into a country that we can reduce our emissions. We should be retraining, upskilling our workforce. There is money there. The Scottish Government have invested £500 million into the North East and Moray for that just transition in this term of government. They asked the UK government to match it. They haven't. The UK government are also dragging their heels on investing in a shovel-ready project at St Fergus that we could be investing in jobs here, right in the North East and Peterhead.
OK, let me hear from that lady on the front row down there. Yes, on you go.
I'm agreeing with a lot of what I hear, but one of the things that sort of riles me is that, you know, we talk about all this oil and gas coming from our waters, and yet it's put on the international market. So actually, in the end, it's not benefiting much the people of Scotland, and we pay the highest bills that there are. It's entirely unfair.
Douglas Lumsden.
Yeah, I was going to say, while we've got a need for oil and gas to be used in this country, we should produce it ourselves. It's much better for the environment that we do that, and it's also much better for the jobs.
So that lady's question is, where's the benefit here? Hang on a second. Where's the benefit?
It's produced here and imported somewhere else. You would rather switch the taps off and all the jobs in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire would be gone.
No, I said no cliff edge, just transition.
Well, that's what
the question was about £117 billion worth of imports. We are importing oil and gas, partly because this Conservative government decided it didn't even need gas storage. So what it's been doing is buying at the last minute from people who are smart enough in France and Germany to think that they might need stores of material rather than just always working at the last minute, as the British government does. There is no, I mean, I know I'm going to be unpopular here. We have got to change. There is no, we are going to end up with stranded assets The lady is totally right. Oil and gas is being drilled, is being sold on the international markets to the highest bidder. It benefits us questionably. We're sitting beside a country, Norway, that has a state-owned company, so that what is drilled there goes back to the coffers of Norway, but they don't use oil and gas. They export it to suckers like us. So 30% of our gas comes from Norway. What do they use? Hydro. And what are we now expanding in? Hydro. That's good. So I know this is difficult for the North East, but those countries that are in front of the curve, that are fastest to making an inevitable change and get behind owning the technology and making the entire shift, which Scotland is in an excellent position to do, that's the way you safeguard the future, not just the next 5 years.
James, is this answering any of the points that you raised there?
So I think it's some of the decisions that have been made recently, and I suppose that, to be fair to the SNP, they don't, whatever they say, they don't actually have a role in licensing anyway. So, but it's good if this can support the industry. We are already doing some of these things, as you say, in Scotland and the North East in terms of energy transition. But I think the signals that come out of government really have a much larger impact than maybe politicians think sometimes. And weak signals on oil and gas are read by investors as weak signals on energy generally.
Well, that's crazy then, isn't it?
Well, I'm afraid that's a matter of fact.
We just out that that's crazy. We've also got a situation where renewables, what we're paying for renewables, is fixed by generally the price of gas. So that even though renewables are cheaper to produce than gas, we end up paying more because the way it's fixed is like that.
Again,
now, when will a British government
this is government
separate
and
those two systems?
Yep.
And so we have separate pricing for renewables. These are the questions we need to get into instead of grinding an axe over a dead fossil fuel industry.
Yeah,
I think it is a bit. I mean, I agree with an awful lot of what you've said, Leslie, but there are tens of thousands of people in this region who still rely to put food on their kids' tables on this industry. And if we talk about, you set the problem out well, really well, but we do need a plan about how to get there.
So
we
what's
need to make
Labour's
sure.
plan?
So we'll have a nationally owned electricity generation company, GB Energy. We'll put that in place, and we get
Which
elected.
will not knock out BP and Shell.
It will certainly put a big dent in terms of that place in the market, and it will allow us to retain the value that you're talking about in our economy and deliver jobs. That's a big part of that. But we also need to ensure that we have the right energy mix and that we tackle issues of demand. Demand is something that the Scottish Government can be doing now. But we do need to talk about, the fact that, no gas storage, but the decommissioning of nuclear across the country, a part of a sustainable and reliable base load. It has to be the right energy mix that we have across the UK. Since 2010, it's been a basket case. An absolute basket case. A government that's lurched from one place to another.
If you're advocating for the UK government to retain this reserved powers over energy and oversee the energy in the whole of the UK, what do you say about people in Scotland who are paying the highest energy costs when we are creating the energy here?
So there's certainly people have higher energy costs in Scotland, in part because we use more of it. That's a big part.
We're further away from the grid.
So there is,
We're further away from
so you're right, standing charges are higher, and we do need to deal with it, some of the regulation of the marketplace. We do have to work in that area, but we have to make sure that we get the supply right as part of that.
What about the whole privatisation of energy?
I just said they'll have it nationalised. GB Energy.
You're not privatising. You're not reversing the privatisation of energy supply companies, are you?
Not wholesale.
No. So there's the problem. Margaret Thatcher privatised energy and created a hell of a problem for Britain for a long, long time. We're tripping over ourselves with the difficulties created by that privatisation, and you're not going to change it.
We've got a lot of people that work in the sector in the audience. I want to hear from them tonight. Man down here, yes.
So further oil exploration and business as usual is not tenable with the climate crisis. The IPCC report came out last week, again giving warning about climate disasters. I'm a young person, and I will see the bad impact of the policies that are being implemented now. I think we need a renewable revolution in the next 10 years, not just for the climate crisis, but it's better in terms of economics, secure jobs for places like the northeast of Scotland, but also cleaner air, and most importantly, tackling the climate crisis. The disasters that are awaiting to happen are already happening.
Man in the blue shirt. on the end of the aisle. Yeah, on you go.
Already been referenced to Margaret Thatcher. We have to remember that there was no just transition for the mining communities in the United Kingdom when she destroyed their livelihoods and destroyed their communities. So a just transition for all those who are operating both onshore and offshore in the oil and gas industry has to be planned for. And the villains really here are, and you have identified them, are the international oil companies, Shell and BP. We've seen the profits that they are making, and they're making them at our expense. So what we need, back to the point, is no divisions amongst the politicians. We need either a UK government, Scottish government, whoever's in power, to square up to them and say enough is enough. And you will have to end this sheer fuel poverty we have in this country. It's them that's causing it.
Douglas Lumsden?
Just on that, Shell, for example, don't actually make any profits in the UK, so that would be a bit...
Well, they've said they do. They've said they do.
No, they
It's
don't.
5% of their 32 billion is here.
So most of the profits then are...
Yeah, but it's
are
not
all...
nothing. If you think nothing is 5% of 32 billion, you've got a different calculator than I do.
It's not good with defending the oil companies, Douglas.
Well, I do. The amount of jobs that they provide in the North East, I absolutely will defend the oil companies.
I
You're going to
represent
throw them to the dogs.
I represent Berkshire and Bucking Coast. Okay, it's a rural constituency, and what we have seen over the last 2 years, the storm damage, the biodiversity damage, the nature damage. We are looking at rising tides, coastal erosion. We are looking at the effects right here and now. The migration of cod affecting our fisheries. We've got urban gull problems in the northeast, and people are wondering why can't we call them? Because there's actually low numbers of gulls because they've all migrated north to Hampshire and Bucking Coast. But these are the effects that are right on our doorstep right now. We're in a climate emergency. You can't ignore that. You have to have an endpoint, Douglas, and work towards that.
You want to switch the taps off, and all the people that are employed up here, they'll be just out of a job.
Let me go back to Michael, who asked the original question: how should Scotland meet its current and future energy needs, given the importations that we have at the moment? Michael, what do you think?
I was really shocked to see the figures from that report. It was much higher than I expected. I agree that we need to get to net zero. Everyone is committed to that objective. But I also see there's a role for oil and gas. We still consume oil and gas in Scotland, and it's got to come from somewhere. And I think it's far better that it comes from Scotland than transporting it from other countries and us trying to essentially push off our obligations around producing it in a sustainable and best practice method.
Thank you. Your views on all of this from home? The hashtag is BBCDN. After this, we're on our Easter break, but we're back on the 26th of April. We're going to be in Stirling for that show. Keep across the website, bbc.co.uk/debate night for further dates and how to come along to the show. Let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from Tim Coles. Tim.
Is it time for us to clamp down on MPs with second jobs?
Thank you, Tim. I'm guessing you asked this after the story this week where some MPs were caught out in an online sting operation offering to work for a fake firm in exchange for thousands of pounds a day. The BBC's only seen edited footage of that. MPs and MSPs, of course, are allowed to have second jobs, and there's no suggestion of parliamentary rules being broken on this. Michael Mara, you're a councillor when you were also an MSP. That's two jobs, isn't it? So that's OK.
Yeah, well, certainly it was serving the public in different ways. I was a councillor for a year. It didn't cause a by-election. It would have cost more to have the by-election than it would have been to continue being a councillor. I think that the big question in this is about where you're buying access to influence. To me, that's the biggest issue. It's whether you are paying tens of thousands of pounds to an MP for them to raise questions, to have influence over a certain part of your business or the regulatory regime that's around it. That's corruption, is what that is, and we should call that what it is. So I think certainly much bigger restrictions in terms of second jobs and income, I think, is appropriate. I do think there are some distinctions you would make about that. Some people are practicing doctors, some people are solicitors that work on legal aid issues. I know that during the pandemic, one of our front bench spokespeople in the House of Commons was working as an A&E doctor through that period. So I think there are some distinctions, but when it's corruption, we should tell it for what it is. What we saw by the led by donkeys funded sting on these Tory MPs was corruption. and it should be stopped.
Well, there's no suggestion they broke parliamentary rules, which is what would lead to them being disciplined on this.
So the question in this is about whether you're asking a shady make-believe company is offering them huge sums of money to use their influence in Parliament. That's when we've talked about this previously. That's what has happened in Parliament. These Tory MPs who are utterly corrupt. It has to stop.
Right, well, the actual question was, is it time to clamp down on MPs with second jobs? Leslie Riddoch.
Well, actually, I don't think Labour is planning to clamp down on second jobs, are you? Totally.
Not completely, for the reasons for the reasons I've just said. If you don't want people to work as doctors during a pandemic, Leslie.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, people will think, is 84,000 quid a year not enough?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
For one. Two, the House of Commons was set up as a sort of gentleman's club for people to kind of be, you know, an MP when they weren't doing something a bit more important with their lives.
We did used to pay our MPs.
Well, quite, because they were, you know, they had private income, and it was predicated on that expectation that you would be able to kind of maintain yourself over and above doing this small democratic thing, which actually wasn't very democratic for a very long time. So it's still got the after hang of that. The Guardian did had a look into this. 17 million quid has been claimed by Tory MPs since 2019. It's been about 2 million for Labour. It's about 200,000 for the SNP. So, I mean, it's quite obvious. It's the Tories are just at it because they're in power. So why wouldn't you want a consultant or a consultancy with someone who's got an inside track? And that's what these guys were found to be promising. They were promising. Why on earth anyone from a new Korean company would want to speak to Boris Johnson beats you, you know? I don't know if anyone had realised that he's just kind of out of favour these days. But it was the connections with power that were being sold so blatantly. And, I mean, Matt Hancock, he's not even a Tory MP anymore. You can't do more to get rid of him. He's an independent. He's an absolute card-carrying disgrace, the man. I don't think anybody could possibly want that guy as a representative, and you can't get rid of him. I would give, if in an independent Scotland, led by donkeys, should get our first medals.
It is across all parties, though. So is the easy way to solve this just say no second jobs for MPs?
It would probably be, actually, although I can quite see that there's people, for example, Philippa Whitford is a practising breast cancer surgeon. Now, you know, if there's a point where she's going to return to Civvy Street at any point, you would actually, I can sort of take your point there, being a bit sniffy, but, you know, you would want people to be able to be practical. But I think you could find a way to have practical skill bases like that being maintained and weed out people who are just at it, looking for consultancy money to connect them with corridors of power.
And I think Sandesh Gulhani, your health spokesman, still works in the NHS.
Exactly. I think Emma Harper is sometimes a nurse as well. I think that's sometimes mentioned. But, you know, the thing we're seeing with Matt Hancock, you know, personally, I wish he would just go back to the jungle and stay there because I think he's just, you know, a disgrace. But I think banning all second jobs is not the right way forward, as you mentioned. Well, as you mentioned, you know, things with Sandesh, for example. It's good that we've got a practising GP that's also an MSP. There's other people that I'd mentioned as well.
So where do you draw the line then? I mean, Leslie's point, is £84,000 not enough to pay our politicians?
I think certainly it's enough, but that's actually more than I get paid. But I actually agree with Michael on this one, that when it's on about consultancy and trying to buy in favour, then I would be totally against it.
It's much broader than that as well, Stephen. We have to connect it to the other parts. We have to connect it to the VIP lane during the COVID pandemic, where we're handing out contracts for billions of pounds to companies. We have to make that connection, it's absolutely clear. We have to connect it to the Russian money that goes into the Tory party and funds the Tory party across the UK. That is the culture of corruption and sleaze that's right at the heart of with a dictatorial foreign power right at the heart of government, Boris Johnson tied up right in the centre of it. It has to end. There's one way of doing that, is by kicking these people out.
James Bream, as a businessman and an economist, you know, if MPs have business interests, perhaps, which gives them better knowledge of the economy and what's going on, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
The question was, should it be clamped down on? And I think there's enough debate here to say, yes, it obviously should be. I think, you know, as somebody who runs a business, you've got a contract of employment. And usually it says that you'll give your best in that job. And I'm not sure how you can do your best if you're spending time outside it on consulting and these kind of things. So I suspect, yes, it should be clamped down on. And actually somebody probably outside the party system should be given some permission perhaps to you know, allow the odd case that we've got here to say that's actually okay.
So it
That's
should be
how
like
you
a
deal with it
special
in a business.
dispensation rather than...
Seems pretty simple to me.
Okay, let's go into our audience. Gentleman in the back row there on the straight top. Yeah.
I think this talk of politicians with second jobs, we've got to remember these are also the people that are labelling frontline key workers as greedy for asking for a cost of living pay rise. Now, these politicians are earning a salary of £84,000 a year with a second job. We could only dream of earning that money. So we're not the unreasonable ones. They're the unreasonable ones for having a second job on top of an already substantial salary.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. Man with the glasses there. Yeah, there you go.
If MPs and MSPs have time for a second job, I just can't see how they can be representing their constituency properly. I mean, I don't have time to do another job.
Thank you. Karen Adam, you were a councillor, I think, as well, when you became an MSP as well.
I gave up my councillor job because I felt that I couldn't commit to two of them. And I know there is a cost for a by-election, but I also felt that the representation was really important for the constituents in Midford-Martin. So I stepped down from a councillor position. But you have to remember as well that I have, you know, children, older children now, but some children with additional support needs. So I kind of do have a second job, but it's an unpaid one as a carer for my children. But in that regard, I don't know how anybody could have a second job. When I first got elected as an MSP, it was 24/7, and it's still a bit like that. If you're working hard for your constituents, those queries never stop coming in. Casework never stops coming in. There's always more and more jobs to do. How you could take on another job, and becoming a politician is not a stepping stone in a career. It shouldn't be used as networking. It shouldn't be used to stepping up into anything to be gaining more money. When you are a politician, you're a public servant. You are there, you're being paid by public funds to do a job for the people that have elected you. It is an honour, it is a privilege, and it should be paid, you know, for the job that you do. But ultimately, if you're putting in all that time and effort to your constituents, there's no need to have a second job.
So if the National was to offer you a column, you would say...
I have a column with the National, and I don't get paid
Sorry,
for it.
I must have missed that.
And I don't get paid for it. You need to read it then, Stephen. It's very good.
That's a second job. You get paid for that.
I don't get paid for it.
Okay.
No, I don't get paid at all.
Would you like to pay you for it?
No, absolutely not. No, I get paid. I've got a job.
Leslie?
But in any case, the thing that was happening with Matt Hancock and Kwasi Kwarteng, these are not second jobs. These were just episodic, just hours of consultancy. So let's not dignify it with the word job.
Yeah.
They were never going to do anything as concerted, as, you know, as coherent as have a job. They were simply there to just, for one small moment, connect somebody from Korea with Boris Blinken Johnson. And they were being paid for it. That's what it was.
Gentleman on the aisle, up here. Yes, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so much the issue is having jobs. I mean, I think of Rosanna Allen Khan down in Tooting as a doctor. That can be a duty to public service. However, I think there's a lack of transparency. Yeah. MPs and MSPs are reporting these things, and you find out about it a month later. And in lobbying, my gosh, like the reporting on lobbying, there's no transparency whatsoever there. I think they're the two things that need to be clamped down on rather than a blanket ban on second jobs.
Michael Marks, the more we get, I mean, you've all got registers of interest there. It's all in the public domain. You've got to go looking for it, haven't you?
Well, it's on the website, but there is a lobbying register. So if people lobby an MSP, they register online. And certainly if it's a registered organisation, that was legislation that was brought forward by the Labour Party to make sure that we actually have more transparency in those areas. So I think that we can always do more about transparency. I think the gentleman's absolutely right, and we have to be, in essence, above reproach. And I agree in terms of, I can't really imagine how you would fit in a second job. But, you know, and Leslie's also right, this is just grifting. It's, you know, it's just taking cash for access. It's corruption.
Man on the front row down here. Yeah, when you go.
Yeah, I think I'm probably just going to echo what you were saying there. To be fair, I think it is, if we look at these jobs, they are just lobbyist positions, and people are being paid 60, 70, £100,000 for an hour's work. Consultancy, I can't imagine the job where you actually get paid that sort of money, and I'm fairly sure that nobody in the audience or the stage here tonight will be able to identify with that.
Thank you. Your views on all of this? The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Let's go to our fourth question of the night, which comes from Julie Pose. Julie.
Good evening. Many city and town centres are now a shadow of their former glory, particularly Union Street in Aberdeen. What are your plans to bring life back to our centres?
Thank you. I think 1 in 4 shops in Union Street now are empty. There's this new initiative from Bob Keeler, local entrepreneur, to try and breathe new life into Aberdeen's key shopping street. James Bream, what do you think needs to happen?
Yeah, I remember going to Union Street as a boy, and it was like a big day out. It's certainly not a day out that you'd relish now. Took my cousin to visit, and she was pretty shocked, actually. I think the one thing that I'd say about Union Street is it's suffered from historic planning decisions, and now we've got ourselves in a situation where there's lots of different retail areas around Aberdeen that are quite disparate. So I think Union Street will never be one as it was before. I think it ultimately needs to find a purpose, and I think that's what I'd say about all city centres. You know, they need a purpose.
What could the purpose be here?
Well, I think Union Street probably needs to be almost split into 3, you know, residential, office and a smaller amount of retail. And I remember about 20 years ago I did some work in a place called West Kilbride that had a very sad-looking town centre, and it basically reinvented itself as a craft town. So it's jewellers, shops in the bottom, residential on the top, and it's actually still the jeweller that got my wedding ring from there is still there. And I think Union Street needs to go through a complete reinvention. The one good thing I think about Bob Keeler getting involved is it might actually bring some coalescence from the public and private sector and actually make something happen, because there's been lots that people have disagreed on. I think we all agree that there needs to be progress and coalescing around a number of things that people like and can actually agree on would be a massive step forward, because we've just not had that for such a long time.
Yeah. Bob Keeler, incredibly successful local businessman who's doing this for nothing. And the question that he put out there is, what are the small things? What are the bigger concepts? What has worked elsewhere that you have all seen? So think about that, and I'll come to you in just a second. Leslie Riddick, looking at Union Street, so many other streets around Scotland in the same position, Perth, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Stirling as well. What should happen?
This is such a toughie because, I mean, you've seen a whole lot of the large department stores that sort of held space collapsed, whether it was Debenhams or other big chain stores. John Lewis at Marks and Sparks in Dundee is moving out of the centre of Dundee to a mall where it's easier to park. So there's all these kind of things driving that. Now, you can't probably get back to a stage where you begin to make the city centres a free-for-all for cars again, just to try to drive trade. But the public transport is going to have to be excellent. And it's going to have to, I think, city centres are for exchange, they're for human exchange, they're for being able to reconnect, they're for arts experience, cultural life. It's got to be something, it's got to be an experience-based thing that makes you feel that you want to come to the centre of your world to see what everybody else is up to. And that's got to be a big planned for thing, which I realise is quite tough. But we're going to have to, because it's so depressing. I don't know what everybody else feels, but I remember my mother used to be, when we went back to Wick, where we went every year, she would actually find it more and more depressing as her life went on, because the place was not what she remembered, you know, being able to walk across the harbour supposedly on the fishing boats. It was so frisky. And everywhere in Scotland has got these sad memories of things that we can't be going on like this, because it's not necessary. We can breathe life into places because we love them.
You said it's so depressing. So many hands went up in the audience. There, lady with the blonde hair in the middle. Yes. On you go. Yeah. You. Yeah.
It was just what you said there about there's almost an appetite for cultural stuff in the city centre. And we recently had the Spectral Light Festival in Aberdeen, which had like 45-minute queues just to even access Union Terrace Gardens. So there's a massive appetite, I think, here. It's just about, and that the recent kind of initiative by Bob to harness that, I think I'm so hopeful, and that's why I was so keen to hear what would you do, the really concrete things, what can actually change.
OK, thank you. I'll come to you in a second. Gentleman here, yeah.
Just one thing that throughout the pandemic as well is the investment in Union Street. There was these massive plant pots that were put up and down Union Street, and I don't know how many millions was spent on the lights that don't even work half the time. What a waste of money. What a waste of money that is to put them up. I know where Belmont Street is. I don't need a light up sign to tell me where it is.
Thank you. Let's go down to the front row over here, lady in the black top. Yeah.
Well, during like COVID, the kind of middle area of Union Street was kind of shut off, And I don't know if it's just me that's feeling like this, but I feel like it was better to go and shop and to hang out and to see everybody. And I feel like there was a little bit more traffic with people. Obviously not like during the very bad times of COVID, but I feel like it was just a little bit better with more kind of pedestrian freedom.
I think that's one of the things Bob Keeler's looking at. Just this gentleman here, and then I'll come to the panel. Yes, and you go.
Yeah. I mean, I think the challenges that Aberdeen City Centre faces are massive. We've lost our independent cinema, the Belmont Cinema. You've got the empty retail units on Union Street. Somebody's in the audience already mentioned. Pools and libraries closing. The public purse is a big black hole. The only light that I can maybe see is it needs to be private and public partnership has got to drive the solution,
Leslie used the word depressing. Is that how you feel about it just now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that other parts of Scotland, other cities, I think have got a march on Aberdeen. I think even Dundee, with the V&A, the new railway station, I think Dundee City Centre has done a great job at almost kind of reinventing itself.
Right, Michael Mara.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to disagree on some points as a Dundonian, and I have to say that going around in Aberdeen, there's still more retail space. It's livelier than there is in the heart of Dundee. We've made some investments, but I think it is actually, there's loads of hands shooting up because I think people feel passionate about this because it's part of about your identity, the place, but it's also the places we share. And I think that's really important just to how we live together as a community, meeting people who you might not agree with, that you can actually have a kind of discussion with, or it's in the pub or cafes or other places. I do think that those spaces, libraries, swimming pools, so the swimming pool in Dundee has been closed for 2 years. It's a bill of £6 million, and it's a huge loss to the city centre. Bringing kids in, taking them out for an ice cream. Sorry, sir?
Bucksburn swimming pool.
Yeah, and Bucksburn swimming pool as well. So actually, it's how you tie all that together. What are the spaces that we share, and how do we make work? There are things we can do. We can do something about an Amazon tax. We can make sure that we have a level playing field on tax. We can try and sort out some of the foreign ownership in terms of big parts of our city centres.
What would you do with that Amazon tax? You'd ring-fence that and use it for city centre regeneration?
Not entirely, but I think that's one of the purposes that it could be used for. Absolutely could be used for. And we have to make sure, in essence, that it's more about how you compete between online and physical. And that's the retail side of it. But we do need to make sure that we continue to pay for libraries, that we continue to pay for swimming pools, that the council in Aberdeen are cutting and closing right now. Those are the places that bring people together, that bring them into them.
10 years before that.
Well, they weren't closing the swimming pools or the libraries in Aberdeen.
We're spending all the money on vanity projects. And now you're
let's try and stay positive with the ideas here. James Bean, you live here, you shop here, you work here. What do you think?
So the V&A in Dundee that's just opened was an undefined museum in 1999 when they first came up with the idea. So it's taken 20-something years for it to happen. So this is my point about coalescing about things that we can agree on. And I think the great point there about the pedestrianisation is it's one thing that people generally feel good. There's a disagreement on where it is. I think the other thing is about public space. Some of the great cities have great public spaces, and a place in Aberdeen would have a few buildings knocked down recently. Maybe we could just leave them as public space. I think as a city, we've never had to regenerate in Aberdeen. We've always been able to survive or carry on, but we're now at a point where actually regeneration is something we need. Other cities have done it over and over again, and they've done it with the same type of template, and we unfortunately have ignored developing master plans and long-term plans, and we move from mistake to mistake over 5-year periods.
Right, well, let's find out what that might look like from people who live here. Lady in the back row, yeah, on you go.
I was just going to say that one positive thing for Aberdeen is that the European Piping Championships are coming to Aberdeen soon, and lots of young people are getting involved. Granite City Pipers. My son's really looking forward to it. That's
brilliant. Nice advert for them. Thank you very much indeed. Douglas, what needs to happen?
Yeah, when I was council co-leader, one of the things I did do was pedestrianise the middle bit of Union Street. Obviously, that wasn't popular with everyone, and it was later overturned. But I wanted more people living and working in the city centre. I wanted more independent shops on Union Street. Business rates is still a big issue on Union Street, so something needs to change on that. But I think that's the key way of making it vibrant. Union Terrace Gardens was another project that we moved forward with, and I think if Union street was pedestrianised, linking onto Union Terrace, that would have been a good thing, but unfortunately...
So, speaking to Bob Keeler, what would you say to him he needs to focus on?
I would focus on the centre bit of Union Street first of all. Look at again whether it could be pedestrianised, because you know we need ideas. We need to do something differently. So why not pedestrianisation? But we need to take everyone with us on that journey.
Caroline.
I'm glad that Douglas has said that we need ideas, because he clearly didn't have any when they built Marshall Square development. If that had been kept an open green space for people to come together and spend, instead what they've done is borrowed money, and now public money has been paid out on these huge loans on vanity projects, when it could have been invested in the 10 years that Labour and Tory were in coalition. And Aberdeen City Centre, they could have been investing
looking forward into the future.
Well, they could have been investing in these things
close
that
down
matter
libraries
to
and
people.
swimming pools. That's your plan going forward, isn't it?
No, that is not it at all.
6 libraries in the city.
£400,000 it was going to cost for Bucksburn swimming pool. Why did the Tories put forward a budget, an opposition budget, that was suggesting a total of 100 teacher positions, equivalent to 100 teacher positions would have been cut in Aberdeen City Centre.
And look positively at where we can go from here.
Yeah.
What would you suggest?
I think everybody's been right in talking about culture and experience, and that is something. I represent the coastal constituency, which is different from, it's got smaller coastal villages, and what draws people in is getting to know and understand the history of the place, meet people who've lived there for a long time. We have silversmiths. You can go in for an experience. You can maybe buy something. We need more social enterprises. We need the money that has been generated in these places kept there and put back into it to regenerate.
Right, last word to the audience on this, because they live here, and we've got about a minute and a bit left. So, a lady there on the end first. Yes, on you go.
Yeah, you've said so many things, and I agree with you. We need somewhere that people can meet, open space that people can meet. I have 3 teenagers at home. I have an 18-year-old and 16-year-old, and they'll rather go to Edinburgh or Glasgow to meet up with friends. They will all leave Aberdeen and move to Edinburgh or Glasgow just to go to the shopping centre in Glasgow and Edinburgh and just have fun there. We need something for our young adults
to keep them here.
Aberdeen.
OK, and gentleman in front of you in the striped shirt. Yes.
Yeah, I guess the issue that we're talking about here is how to get people more involved with the city, to help to rebuild it and to promote Aberdeen as a place that people want to be. But we need to address the underlying issue that people are now in higher level of poverty. The cost of living is preventing people from being able to have expendable income to invest into the city. So we need to look at reducing the level of poverty in the city and the country to enable them to be able to reinvest the money that they do have into the local community. We just don't see that with the current economic policies that are in play.
From anyone.
Yes.
I'm sorry, we're out of time. So many hands up on this. I know you're all so passionate about it. That's it for tonight, though. We'll be back after Easter on the 26th of April from Stirling. If you missed any of tonight's programme, it's repeated later on BBC One Scotland, or you can catch it any time on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight, and to our lovely audience here in Aberdeen, and to you at home for watching our 100th show. We're back with show 101 in Stirling at the end of April. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in Debate Night, good night.